So this is the co-counseling training video 2, second video. So today what I'm going to talk about is the key elements of being an effective co-counselor. And these are skills and concepts that you'll use for the rest of your life if you keep practicing co-counseling. I've been co-counseling for decades and have learned all different kinds of techniques and approaches and things that you'll be learning as you learn co-counseling. But the things I talk about today have to underlie everything we do. And we have to keep returning to these basic concepts in order for our counseling of anyone to be effective. So number one, overriding in co-counseling is that we are paying close, loving, undivided attention to the other person during their turn. So we work hard to lay our own concerns and troubles aside, to not let our minds go off onto things that aren't about that person. We practice thinking about just what that person is telling us and being there for them. Anytime we notice our mind wandering off, just as you would do with meditation, you gently but rapidly bring yourself back to the focus on the person who's speaking. We want our eyes always on the person who's speaking. That person may not be looking at us. People don't generally make constant eye contact while they're the person speaking. The person speaking in any interaction tends to be looking around a fair bit. Some of the time they'll be looking at us, but not constantly. That's up to them. They do what's comfortable for them. But the listener should always have their eyes on that person's eyes so that anytime they look up at you, right away, your eyes will be available to them. They will see you there. And then your mindset is you want to be noticing the person's strengths. You want to be noticing their abilities. You want to be noticing what you like about them. And that's our orientation towards each other in co-counseling is, I believe you can do it. I think you're a really good person. I think there's a lot of great things about you. And that's what I'm going to decide to notice, because that's also going to help it become true, even more true as the years go by, because having people have faith in us really affects our ability to become the people that we want to be. So next, we offer support and validation. We don't just sit there listening silently. That actually tends to make people feel less heard. So we're going to say things, but we're going to keep them brief and supportive, and we're going to keep them about the client, not about ourselves. So just normal supportive comments, the way you would make in any other conversation. Ooh, that sounds really hard. Ooh, that sounds great. Congratulations. Wow, how was that for you? That must have been such a tough time. Oh, I can understand why you feel that way. That seems really natural that you would feel that way. Just all those kinds of regular old supportive comments. But not about you. And I'll say more about this in a few minutes, but we want to break the habit of showing our support by talking about ourselves. It's completely about the other person. How much to talk during the other person's turn is something that you have to feel out. They should be talking almost their whole turn. So we do not want to be taking up very much of their time with our own comments. So the general guideline I give people is keep your comments brief, something really quick and succinct so that you're not taking up the other person's turn. But say enough that the person can feel that you're there, that the person feels that you're thinking about what they're saying, that you're taking in what they're saying. And with comments that have some specificity to them, that aren't just generic, so that the person knows that you're really hearing what they're talking about that particular day. But just be aware of how often and how much you're talking during the other person's turn. Keep it really moderate and make sure you're not taking up a lot of space during their turn. Next, we want to support and encourage feelings. Co-counseling is a place that's where it's really about pursuing our feelings and about trying to process and release our feelings, our painful feelings from the past, so that we can heal and move on and stop feeling limited by past wounds. So that means that whatever somebody's feeling, we want to be there with that. We never try to talk people out of what we're feeling. We would never say, oh, but there's no reason to feel that way because blah, blah. And it's tempting, particularly when someone, for example, is talking about having bad feelings about herself or himself. We have this real temptation to say, oh, no, you have no reason to feel that way. Again, in co-counseling, we're going to try to break that habit. and say, wow, you're feeling bad about yourself today. Instead of, don't feel bad about yourself. It's like, oh, you're feeling bad about yourself today. Tell me about that. What's that like? You seem like a great person to me, but obviously that's not how you're feeling today. Tell me about that. And so that means we want to examine in ourselves the places where we can't tolerate someone else feeling bad. Those tend to point to wounds that we have that we need to try to do some processing of. And because things that we have, the things that we have the hardest time hearing in other people are often good kind of flags for us for issues that we need to attend to in ourselves. So, for example, if it's just so hard for you to give anyone any space to talk about feeling bad about themselves, well, that's probably because there's things going on in you that need to be paid attention to about ways that you were conditioned when you were young, in particular, to feel bad about yourself. If we can't deal with people's discouragements, if we always have to say, oh, no, it'll be okay, oh, it'll get better, well, then we have to look at that. Like, why is it so hard for me to deal with people's discouragements? I do believe it's going to get better for the person, but I need to not lead with that when they're in a really discouraged place, because when I say, oh, it's going to get better, that actually doesn't help the person very much. What it mostly does is say to them, I can't handle how discouraged you are. It's too much for me. I'd have to pretend that you're not, or yank you out of there, because I can't just sit with the fact that, wow, you're in a discouraged place. And as I'm going to remind people over and over again throughout co-counseling training, our primary objective is to help the person feel accompanied. In whatever they're going through, they're not having to go through it alone. They've got someone caring about them, ideally really loving them as they go through it. So don't let anything else get in the way of that primary goal. Am I saying and doing things in a way that are going to help this person feel accompanied in what they're in? Because that's where they are for the moment. And I'm going to believe that they won't always be there. And I actually am going to communicate that in certain ways, but not right away, and not in ways that suggest to them, don't feel that, or I can't handle it, that you're feeling that. For example, I'm probably going to wait 10 minutes into somebody's conversation about how deeply discouraged they are before I would say anything suggesting that I believe things will get better. And even then I would say, well, I believe things are going to get better, but I really get it that for you right now, it doesn't look like things are ever going to get better. I really get that that's how you're feeling. So we want to focus on being there with the person, in there with them, about what they're feeling, and indicating to them that we're not afraid of their sadnesses, we're not afraid of their fears, we're not afraid of their discouragements. We're okay to be with them. We're not pulling away from them, because this is what we experience so much, is that when people realize we're having a really hard time, they can't handle it, so they pull away, and then our hard time, of course, gets even harder because we're being left alone with it. So be present and be willing to get your hands dirty, in a sense. And then we also really want to support and encourage those feelings getting out, because that's our ultimate goal, is for these feelings to be able to get out so the person can heal from all that pain. And that means when someone starts to cry or laugh or tremble or give kind of tantrumy sort of what we call storming in co-counseling, we don't get in the way of that. We don't discourage that. In fact, in many ways, that's our highest priority. Like if someone's starting to have a laughing fit in a co-counseling session, or just, starting to giggle about a story they're telling, I'm not going to, as their counselor, head them off in any other direction than that. It's like, oh, we should keep this person laughing as long as we can keep them laughing. In the next class, in class 3, I'll talk in detail about the human discharge mechanisms and how to really understand them and why they're so important. But what I'm just saying for now is, when those feelings start to come out, when you see feelings being released, just encourage that, improve it. Know that it's watching good things happening. You're watching somebody healing. The notion of taking a really positive look, a positive view of someone who's crying, that's a new one, and that's a hard one for people. It can take some real getting used to. I'm asking you, when someone's crying, not to see that as a crisis, not to see that as something that you need to do something about to make them feel better, but that actually you're in the presence of somebody healing. Because crying is one of the most healing things that the human being can do, particularly when they can cry at all deeply. And imagine, instead of taking the view, oh, the person is so sad, they're crying, which is the typical view that we get hit with when we cry. That's usually how other people come at us. try to think of what would it look like to think, oh, I'm in the presence of a person who's healing, and to look at them with caring, but not pity, and confidence that they're doing exactly what they need to be doing, and almost a certain happiness because I'm watching healing taking place. And I sometimes will even smile at someone who's crying, like a kind smile, obviously not a mean smile. But at first that may seem like very odd to you. Like, how could I smile at someone who's crying? Well, you're just giving them this loving, caring, hey, I'm right with you kind of smile. That doesn't feel bad to them. That's not the same thing as like minimizing their grief. It's not that at all. So we support and encourage people's emotional releases, what we refer to as discharge in co-counseling, and make sure that we don't get in any way in the way of those things. Be really careful about pity, because for most people, nothing's true for everybody, but for most people, pity is not going to be helpful. So avoid tones of voice that sound like you feel sorry for the person, like, oh, that must be so hard. That's we want to steer away from that. If you're going to say, wow, that must be so hard, say it in a way that does not sound like you feel sorry for the person. Just say it like you're compassionate, but that you're confident in them at the same time. You would say, wow, that sounds like you're in a really hard place, or wow, that must have been such a hard thing to go through. That's very different from saying, oh, that must have been so hard. Can you hear the difference there? Those are two really, really different ways of approaching someone who's in pain, who's in emotional pain. And if we've been targeted with a lot of pity, or that was the style of adults that we grew up around, then we're going to be tempted to pass that on to our own children or to other people. And we really want to steer away from the pity approach. Next, you want to be expressing your appreciation for the client. That's one of the great kind of comments to make during the other person's turn. Is just pointing out what you like about them, noticing strengths of theirs just from what they're saying, or just from how they express themselves. Wow, that thing you just explained about, wow, you're so smart, or wow, you express yourself so well, or wow, you just sound like such a kind person. And as you tell about these different things that are going on in your life, just notice the things that they do well. Notice their courage, notice their resilience, notice their faith and trust in other people, notice their willingness to love people. There's a whole positive inventory that you can read in my book, The Joyous Recovery, of just all the ways that we look for strength in ourselves, and then we can apply all of that to how we look for the great things in other people. Wow, you've been such a fighter. Wow, I love how you stand up for other people and not just for yourself. All those kinds of things, just everything that you notice and appreciate. It's great to make a quick comment. It's one of the most valuable things, actually, that a counselor can do in co-counseling, is simply expressing their appreciation and admiration for the client. Try to be as natural as you can be. And when you're new to co-counseling, you are likely to feel some nervousness. It's totally understandable. But just do your best to relax, breathe, and just be normal. There's no need for you to have some special counseling personality. In fact, it's much better if you don't do that. It's much better if you're just exactly yourself. The only thing you're changing is that you're not doing back and forth. You're not like, ooh, you talk about you, I talk about me, you talk about you, I talk about me. We're agreeing that we're going to set a timer, and for this whole time, whatever it is, 45 minutes, 45 or 50 minutes common in a full co-counseling session, it's all you. That's all. That's the only thing that really is changing. I'm going to be loving, I'm going to be supportive, which is how I'm trying to be in life anyhow, but just without talking about myself. I'm just me. And that also means that even in how you give support, say things that you really mean. In other words, if someone's had a little minor accomplishment, don't go, oh, that's amazing that you did that. Don't say that unless you really feel like what they did was amazing. If you feel like, oh, that's a nice accomplishment, say, oh, that was a nice accomplishment. Good for you. Don't go, wow, you did that. Because that's fake. And people can sense when other people are being fake with them. We pick it up. And the sort of smaller, kind of softer given appreciation is often heard more by the person. Again, it's going to depend on the particular person. But when we actually make less of a big deal, but we make good eye contact and we sound like we really care. Like if I look someone right in the eye and say, that's great that you did that. That must have been really hard. That must have taken a lot of work and a lot of courage to do that. That's typically going to mean more to them than something that's like, whoa, I can't believe it. Wow, that's amazing that you did that. It's much better to really connect with the person, make it kind of lower drama, but more sincere. That's typically going to be what helps the person feel like, wow, you really mean it. And so be sincere, be genuine, be yourself. Don't say things that you don't mean. Don't agree with things that you don't agree with. That's going to work against what you're trying to accomplish in a number of different ways. As I talked about in the lesson 1 of co-counseling, you need to be in charge of the session decisively while you're in the counseling role. So keep working towards that. You're running the session, you're taking it through its phases. One question that people ask me is, well, what if we're doing a mini session? What if we're doing like 5-minute turns each or 10-minute turns each? Do I still take the session through its phases? Not necessarily. I still typically want to have someone tell me something good at the beginning, a new and good, even if it's really quick, 20 seconds. But I don't worry about like minor challenges, minor upsets when we're only doing 5 or 10-minute turns. Just go for it. What do you want to talk about today? And whether we're going to do a present time attention out at the end of the mini session, that depends on what the person got into. But but you can almost just ask them, do you need a question? And they'll say, oh yeah, I could use a question. And then you give them a present time question. Or if you could tell, oh, they got into some kind of intense feelings there, then you can know without asking that you're going to want to do some present time questions. But other times, when you're taking really short turns, you might pretty much not do like the present time, and you're not likely to do minor upsets. The quick, new, and good, and then probably pretty much spend their whole time on whatever it is they want to talk about. But remember, it's the counselor's job to attend to these questions. So you can even say, do you want to do a quick, new, and good, or do you want to just dive in? Always ask that rather than just sort of sitting there passively and not running the session. It feels much better to the client when they can feel that you're at the helm. You got things under control. And then finally, you really need to be the anchor. You're the anchor, which means that you're the source of hope. Not necessarily that you're making hopeful comments and what I've already said now about not being overly like positive thinking-ish or look on the bright side-ish. We really don't want to go there. But what I mean much more is that you're communicating hope just through the whole way you look, through keeping your face bright, through keeping your posture strong, through consciously connecting genuinely with places inside of yourself where you feel hopeful. And you've got those places in you. If you didn't, you wouldn't get out of bed. And you certainly wouldn't be learning to co-counsel unless you felt like it's worth trying, right? Like there's still hope in the world. And so those places exist inside you. And you want to make an effort to connect with those places during the other person's turn. Not because they can sense it. It'll be largely unconscious for them, but to some extent, even consciously, they can sense whether you're connected with hope during their turn or not. And that's why I try to steer people away from co-counseling for now, who are in a place where they're so deeply discouraged that they really don't believe life can be that good for anybody, or certainly not for them. And they're just so weighed down in that discouragement, that what people often call depression, and sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just very intense downheartedness. But they're so weighed in that they can't really be the pillar for somebody else during the other person's turn. And that person is going to probably want to wait 6 months, a year, a couple of years before they come to co-counseling, till they, through other resources, can come out of the extent of darkness that they're living in. So the image that I like to use with people is we want to heal from stuff, including some really hard stuff we've been through in life. And it's like going out into these crazy seas that are full of these high, scary, crashing waves in order to take that on. And in order to do that, safely, or in order to have the courage to do it, we have to sense that we're tethered to the shore, that like someone's going to keep us safe, that, that we're anchored. So your job as counselor during the other person's turn is to be their anchor so that they can take on those wild waves. And then you can do that during your turn. So you're the anchor. You're the source of hope during the other person's turn. And that means you need to connect with places in yourself where you genuinely feel hopeful. Some things now to not do. And it's not going to be a real long list. I focus way more on what yes to do, but I do want to say some things about what not to do. So first of all, we don't give advice and we don't do problem solving. And in other words, what I mean by problem solving is you don't even say, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? So that's not that different from advice, because the things on your list, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Those are suggestions. And we're agreeing not to make suggestions in co-counseling. We're actually agreeing not to make suggestions in the Whole Peak Living Network. So the most we would have you say is, what have you tried? But not any specifics about, have you tried this? Have you tried that? What have you tried? What have you found works? What have you found doesn't work? That's a fine question to ask. If they're talking about something that you know a tremendous amount about, one thing that is acceptable to say is, this is something I actually know quite a bit about. Feel free to ask me about it at another time. But don't offer that they can talk to you about it then, because that puts them under pressure to say yes. And you're not to put them under any pressure to hear what you have to say. As soon as you're in the information category, the problem-solving category, they should not be put under any pressure, and any suggestion will put them under pressure. So that's why we say, this is something I know a lot about. You can ask me about it another time if you choose, because then there's no pressure. They never ask us. They never ask us. So no advice, no problem solving. 2, don't talk about yourself. And the challenge here that stands out, I find, is that people want to talk about themselves as a way of being supportive. So your intentions are good, but in co-counseling, we don't do it. So you might want to say, oh, I've been through the same thing. Here's what happened to me. We're saying we want to say that to be supportive, but we're not going to do that in co-counseling. In co-counseling, you never shift the subject to yourself. I don't even say, oh, yeah, I've been through that. Or, oh, I know what you're talking about because I've been through it. I might say, I really get what you're talking about, but I'm not going to say, because I've been through it. It's nothing about me. Nothing about me during the other person's turn. This is hard, and for some people it's frustrating. They're like, oh, I don't want to be restricted by this. I don't like these restrictions. You can have conversations with your loved ones all the time and get out of those what you get out of doing that. What we get out of co-counseling is by doing something different. If we're going to do the same thing, why do it, right? And so much of the power of co-counseling comes from doing things in a very, very disciplined way. There's not a zillion rules, but the ones that we do have, we try to stick with in a really disciplined way. And one of those is, we don't talk about ourselves, even as a way of being supportive. And then last, just to remind you, you don't comment on any past sessions. There's no commenting on, referring to what people have said about past sessions or closed subjects. If the client brings up stuff from a past session, you're free to say, yes, I remember you were talking about that, or yeah, I remember what you said about that, but only because the client brings it up. And even towards the end of their session, even once they're finishing talking about something, I wouldn't refer to it for a slightly different reason, less for a privacy reason and more because you're trying to help them. Now it's towards the end of the session, you're trying to help them rise out. And so I'm not going to say, wow, you went to some deep places today. That's like casting them back towards that stuff. I'm not going to say, wow, you did great work today. Congratulations, the way a therapist might, because that's casting back towards the heavy stuff they were talking about where we're trying to point away from that. There's other reasons actually why I don't like congratulating people for having worked hard in their session or congratulating people for their discharge. Like, don't ever say to someone, oh, it's so great that you can cry the way you can cry. Because we're all trying our best. There's so many better things to congratulate each other for. I've talked about all these things that you can look for to appreciate about the person. Appreciate them for that rather than what kind of session they had. It's a little hard for me to put into words, but I don't think that's what we want to be appreciating about each other. Is what kind of work we did in our session. I would recommend not going there. So these are the basics of effective co-counseling. There's volumes more to learn, but always keep coming back to these essential, underpinning, fundamental skills that are what your client most needs from you every time. And then, you know, in the weeks and months to come, as you're learning more, you can start adding all kinds of techniques. You're going to learn dozens if you stick with learning co-counseling, but don't ever lose these, because these are the ones that matter the most.